encourage you to get it. We're not done with this bridge. We're still taking that bridge over Barnava. I encourage you to get your copy to make it easier for you to follow. Barnava chapter 6, verse 16. I could rehash what I went over the last few weeks, but I'm not going to rehash it. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to move forward in the things of Yahweh. Amen? Baruch Hashem Yahweh. For Yeshua said again, verse 16, Barnava, the epistle of Barnava, 6:16. For Yeshua said again, whereby shall I appear before Yahweh my Elohim and be glorified? He said to, I will give thanks to you in the assembly, notice, in the midst of my brethren. So, according to Barnava 6:16, where is Yeshua glorified? In the midst of the assembly, the Nazarene Israelite assembly, in our midst. His presence, listen, Yeshua's presence among us brings glory to Abba Yahweh. Yahweh praises his Father in the midst of the congregation of Nazarene Yisrael. I will sing to you in the midst of the assembly of the saints. So Yeshua is speaking in the first person, and when we gather together as Yisrael, Yeshua is singing to his Father, according to Barnava, in the midst of the assembly. That's pretty neat. So when we worship Yahweh and we sing to Yahweh, it's not just singing to Yahweh and worshiping Yahweh, it is Yeshua singing and worshiping his Father with us. Isn't that neat? He brings the Father worship and glory in the midst of my brethren. I will sing to you in the midst of the assembly of the saints. We are therefore those whom he brought into the Tov land. So Yeshua sees the assembly, the congregation, the body of Yeshua, as the Tov land of Israel. It is a metaphor, so that Israel is a metaphor for the body of Yeshua. So those of us who are in the body of Yeshua are in the Tov land of Yisrael. Isn't that nice? Isn't that beautiful? A beautiful metaphor. That those of us who are in the body of Yeshua, it is as if we are in the Tov land of Yisrael. Verse 17. What then means the milk and the honey? We sang it this morning during worship, didn't we? Eretz avat chalav, right? Chalav udvash, eretz. We sang it this morning. So what does it mean, the milk and the honey? Chalav udvash. Barnava says in verse 17, it is because a child, again, part 4 or 5, I forgot what part it is, a bridge over Barnava. It is because a child is kept alive, notice, first with honey, and afterwards with milk. Now, at first glance, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Because we know that a child is not kept alive with honey, but rather with milk. Here, Barnava says that we know that a child is kept alive first with honey, and then afterwards with what? Milk. So we too, being quickened by emunah, faith, in his promise and by his word, shall live and rule over the earth. Okay, but notice, in verse 17, Barnava is not speaking about a baby, rather he is speaking about a child. And a child is kept alive first with honey. So it can't be literal honey and it can't be literal milk. Barnava is speaking about something metaphorically or allegorically, because we know in the natural that is not the case. Amen? Turn to your neighbor and say that's not the case.
That's not the case.
In the natural. So the child is kept alive with honey and then with milk, so we too are first quickened or made alive by emunah, so that the emunah is first in his promise and by his word. And then number 2, because of his promise and faith in his Torah, we will live and rule the earth. Therefore, we could assume that the milk is the word of Yahweh, and that the honey is the promised dominion. And the child is first kept alive with the honey, which is a metaphor for the promised what? Dominion over the earth. When Yeshua returns, we will rule and reign with him for 1,000 years. So the honey speaks of the promised dominion that comes first, and then comes the milk. What does that mean? That we have the promise of the Olam Haba, and then to nurture us into the Olam Haba comes the milk. Does any of this make sense? To sustain us until we get into the Olam Haba, or the world to come. And so while we are walking with Yeshua, while we are talking with Yeshua, while we are growing in Yeshua, while we are maturing as Talmidim, we need the milk of the Word, because the honey came first. Isn't that neat? What's the honey? The promise. Now Yahweh has to give us the milk so we eventually get to the honey. And it's like a child. We are children because we want the honey without the milk. And Barnava says, no, first you have to have the what? First you've got to have the honey to see the purpose of your calling, to see the goal of your calling, so that you can press forward to the mark of Yahweh, the mark of the high calling of Yahweh in Messiah Yeshua. And then you will be fed with the milk of His Word. So first comes the honey, then the milk. If I don't see honey at the end of the road, why will I drink the milk of the Word? And because a believing life is full of bumps and is full of what? Bruises. Amen? It's not easy being a Talmid or a Talmidah. It's very difficult. So if I don't first taste the honey, I'm going to put aside the milk of His Word. Yahweh gives us a glimpse of the honey so that we can continue to consume the milk of His Word. Look at verse 18. Barnava 6:18. And we said previously, let them increase and multiply and rule over the fish. Who then is able to rule over the beasts and the fish and the fowls of the heaven? For we ought to perceive that to rule means authority. Can you write that down, please, if you don't have a copy of Barnava? To rule means authority. And the authority is in the increase and in the multiplication. In other words, Israel, we are believing Israel. We are not to multiply and increase in the earth merely to have more followers and more sons than Islam or Edom or Esau. No. We are to multiply so that we can get to live in the honey. Not just to taste the honey, but to live in the honey and rule everything on 4 legs, 2 legs, 8 legs, or 9 legs. And that's what Yeshua is going to do in our lives. He is going to mold us and shape us and conform us into the image of His Son so that we could rule over everything that creeps on the earth. Are you with me? And this is what Barnava is talking about. Let them increase and multiply and rule over the fish. Who are the fish? Metaphorically speaking, the fish are the people of Yisrael. We are going to rule over the parts of Israel that are still in doubt, that are still in unbelief. We are going to rule over unbelieving Israel, notice. And the beasts, who are the beasts? They're the various manifestations of the spirit of Babylon, whose personification, whose greatest manifestation is the end-time spirit of Islam and the false deity known as Allah. And we will rule over the fowls of the heaven. Fowls of the heaven in Scripture are demons, unclean birds that are demons. So the honey is the authority of the believer in the kingdom, and it is this honey that Yahweh says if you realize the honey is the end game of your faith, then you will increase and multiply over Israel, over the enemies of Israel and Yahweh, over the fowls of the heaven, because what did Yeshua say in Luke 10:16? I have given you authority and power. You shall tread on what? Serpents and scorpions and all the power of the enemy. Amen. I heard one preacher the other day on CNN. What a joke. He was talking about, they were talking about demons and casting out demons, because there was a news story in Arizona. You heard about this guy who was casting out a demon from his what was it, his grandson or his son or whatever that was. It was really weird stuff, and then he was doing an exorcism on his child. I think you may have heard that. It was on the news. And they were interviewing a preacher that all of you have heard. I will not mention his name. And he goes, no one has authority over demons. No one today can do exorcism except Yeshua. What a fool. If I mention his name, you'd say, yeah, I listen to him on MCU. I listen to him on AFG. What a fool.
Tell us.
Luke 10:16 says, I have given you power to tread on serpents. I've given you the authority and you the power to tread on serpents, scorpions, and over all the power of the enemy. And he says, no, it doesn't apply to us. We cannot do exorcisms. Only Yeshua can do it. So obviously he's not impressed by the honey. So we will enter a land of milk and honey. And the land of milk and honey speaks of the rulership. Now look at the end of verse 18. We ought to perceive that to rule the honey, speaking about metaphorically the honey, we ought to perceive that the honey means the authority to rule, so that a man by giving commands may exercise lordship. So what we are giving commands now in terms of teaching Torah, but in the Olam Haba we will also be teaching Torah. So that's to give commands. We give commands to the devil, we give commands to demons to obey, and we give commands to other believers not to walk in their own imagination, but to walk in the ways of Torah. So we give commands. You ought to be not necessarily commanding your husband and your wife. You ought to be commanding other believers to get with the program and get with the truth, his Torah. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Oh man, I smell smoke. Bruno, can you check out who Smokey the Bear is? It's coming in through this vent. Somebody must be smoking outside. No, don't worry, it's not me, I'm here. Can't be me. Can't be you either. Verse 19. So in other words, we are to increase. And remember Yahweh said in Bereshit 1:26, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth, remember? And have dominion over the earth. Why? Because it is for the goal of giving commands, barking out orders. Yahweh has called us to bark out orders. And the orders are the Torah of Yahweh, because we will rule and reign with Yeshua for 1,000 years. And so Barnava reminds us that our life is a life that will be flowing with the authority of the King. Yeshua is our King. We will flow with in his authority, but all the while, before we get to eat of the honey, he will have us to drink of the milk that sustains us from day to day in our walk with Yeshua. So that milk sustains us from day to day. But eventually, if you stay with the program, if you just stay with the program, you will have the honey of kingdom authority. Amen?
Amen, amen.
Baruch Hashem Yahweh. You will have the honey of kingdom authority. If therefore, verse 19, Barnava 6:19, if therefore this does not take place now, what? The honey of kingdom authority. We're not ruling the world from Yerushalayim. We're not ruling over radical Islam from Yerushalayim. We are not ruling all the fowls of the air. There are plenty of fowls, demons, religious demons, false doctrines, malicious demons, malevolent demons. There's plenty of demonic activity in the earth, and so we are not in the age of honey. We're not in the age of honey, we're in the age of milk. And remember, I told you in Hebraic understanding, there is this age and that age. How do you get to that age? You graduate from this age. And how do you graduate from this age? You graduate on milk. And then you're promoted into the honey age. Amen? Amen. And then you honey-do this, honey-do this. You get to bark out orders, Torah commandments, to bring the people of the earth into line under the authority of our King, Moshiach Yahshua. Can I hear a good amen? Verse 19, if therefore this does not take place now, obviously we're not ruling and reigning. Some of us are barely surviving in a studio apartment. We are not ruling and reigning from Yerushalayim. We're barely getting by. Yeshua said, I've called you to have life and that more abundantly, and we're barely surviving. So we're still in the milk stage, but we will get to the honey stage. And the whole thing about you are entering Eretz Zavat Chalav Udvash, you are entering a land flowing with milk and honey, speaks of the power to have authority when Yeshua returns to set up his kingdom. Glory to Yahweh. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. Look at Barnava 7:1. Now Barnava is going to shift to a scenario about Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur does not mean the Day of Atonement, it means the Day of Atonement. Why? Because on that day, once a year, the high priest, the Kohen HaGadol, went into the what? Kadosh HaKadoshim, into the Holy of Holies, and made atonements for all the people of Israel. Not just for one person, but for all the people of Israel. So it's the day of many atonements. Many in Israel received their atonement on Yom HaKippurim. Now we're going to get deep. Are you ready to get deep? Are you ready? Let's get into the deeper things. Barnava 7:1. Now Barnava shifts the paradigm, the view to Yom HaKippurim, the Day of Atonements. 7 and verse 1. You perceive, therefore, beloved children, that our Tov Yahweh has manifested to us all things beforehand, to the end that we should know whom we ought to praise, returning thanks for all things. So only Yahweh knows and reveals the future. No other Bible, no other deity, no other holy book has the ability to reveal the future. The Quran is just a bunch of collections of Allah's problem with anger. Confucius is just a bunch of wise sayings, just like the book of Proverbs, except void of the inspiration of the Ruach HaKodesh. Only Yahweh can guess the future, because when Yahweh guesses the future, it's not a guess, it's an established fact. When Yahweh predicts the future, he often does it, and you've heard me teach this on the radio, he often does this in prophetic perfect. In other words, he speaks as if he was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. Was. And yet that was an event 700 years into the future before Yeshua came. That's called the prophetic perfect. Yahweh writes like it is finished, but it's not actually finished. But he writes like it's finished. It's called the prophetic perfect. Baruch Hashem Yahweh. You perceive, beloved children, that our Tov Yahweh has manifested to us all things beforehand. All things we need to know. Not all things, but all things we need to know. Bridge over Barnava. To the end that we should know whom we ought to praise. Returning thanks for all things. What does Yahweh want us to do? Does he want us to be like the one leper? Or like the other 9? He cleansed 10 lepers, symbolic of the 10 tribes of Israel, symbolic of the house of Ephraim. And out of all 10 lepers, only one came back to give Yeshua